Okay. Okay, welcome everybody. We'd like to welcome you on behalf of the Sociology Department to this third seminar in the seminar series, Critical Perspectives on Youth, Community and Urban Regeneration. Today we're delighted to welcome Matt Bowden, who's a lecturer in social care in the Dublin Institute of Technology. He's also a research associate at the School of Social Work and Social Policy in Trinity College, Dublin. His research interests include, and this will be of interest to a lot of you, I know a lot of you are studying in these areas, public policy on youth crime, urban governance, social order and social cohesion. Among his publications is his work on the impact of the Garda Special projects. Today Matt will present on urban governance and practice strategies in youth crime prevention. His presentation promises to be very informative. One aim of his presentation today is to demonstrate that the emergence of youth crime prevention is connected with questions of urban governance and the governance of the subject. He also pays attention to the Irish case, and he'll argue that there's a type of what he calls a moral curriculum. It'll be interesting to find out what he means by this, that has typically dominated the field, and he suggests that alternatives are generally subordinated or excluded, and it'll be very interesting to find out what those alternative viewpoints are. The format is fairly straightforward. Dr. Bowden will speak for approximately 40 minutes, and there should be time then for questions afterwards, approximately 25 minutes of questions after that. So I think there's enough of us here to give a nice warm Limerick welcome to Dr. Matt Bowden.
I think it was Liam Ryan who said that if you clap before the person has spoken, that it's a great act of hope. Yeah. And if you clap after the person has spoken, it's a great act of charity. Anyway, thank you for the welcome. I've received welcomes of various kinds as I've come to Limerick this morning from the taxi driver on the train, or when I got off the train to now. And thank you very much for that. Let me start off by clicking on my title here. It sounds kind of grandiose, but I think urban governance and practice strategies in youth crime prevention. I'm not going to present this as an academic paper. Rather, this is a few ideas. Yeah, it's a few ideas, but it's a few ideas that I think you will hopefully be able to read a little bit more about when it's published as a paper in the journal Theoretical Criminology. Hopefully due out this year. Most of my work is working with social care workers as a sociology teacher, but also with criminology students in our MA in criminology or Master's of Arts in criminology at the IT. I have to get the plug in somehow. Yeah. Okay. Some of the ideas that are in here are part of a module I teach on crime prevention and society, which looks at the role of communities and how communities are mobilised into crime prevention and examines the kind of international literature on issues to do with crime control, community safety, and governance. And I suppose the key kind of issue here is about governance. There's a huge literature on this area, which has to do with how people are regulated. Yeah, whether that's regulated by institutions or regulated by the state. And the discourse in which youth crime prevention has really proliferated, certainly in the British literature, has been around this question of governance. Yeah? So I hope to explore a little bit about what governance is about. I want to also kind of introduce some ideas from particular theorist that I work with, who's Pierre Bourdieu. You probably would be familiar with Bourdieu, some of you. Bourdieu is not traditionally seen as a theorist that works in the governance area, but some of my work is using his ideas and his framework to articulate an alternative theory of governance. We won't need to get too deep into that, but I'll mention it in passing. Now, there has been, as I said, a fairly substantial literature has grown in the English language, mostly in the UK, but also in the US and in France to some extent, around looking at crime prevention strategies as a form of governance, as a way of developing rationalities and technologies for the government of the soul. This comes from Foucault's ideas about the governmentalization of the state and the inscription upon the soul or in the soul of each individual where power lies in society. Now, when Foucault talks about soul, he's not talking about it in a religious sense, but when the French tend to talk about soul, they tend to be talking about the human spirit, the spirit of humanity. Youth crime prevention strategies have also been referred to as being part of this responsibilisation strategy. And David Garland, who's written extensively on the culture of control, talks about this called responsibilisation, that the citizen is asked to be more of a consumer of services to protect themselves, to be much more prudential, and to be less expectant upon the state to provide them with security and safety. From that point of view, there's an onus on each individual citizen, on each subject, to take on board this new culture as part of this cultural turn towards responsibilisation of the individual. And then another way of thinking about youth crime prevention strategies that has emerged, I suppose, associated mostly with Nicholas Rose. I hope you don't mind if I drink while I speak. Talks about youth crime prevention as being a form of panoptic regulation, a form of all-seeing monitoring and cleansing, kind of moral cleansing, where people are asked to take on board the right orientations, the right values, the right dispositions, as it were, in order to regulate themselves. Now, this is, I suppose, a kind of an antidote to the predominant paradigm in youth crime and prevention that has emerged in the last 3 decades, maybe, variously referred to as risk factorology, or as the risk factor paradigm, largely coming out of psychology, but also in some parts of some fields within criminology and sociology, based on the likelihood of a person becoming an offender, becoming delinquent, based upon what we know from predictive factors. Largely based on work that was done in a longitudinal study done in the East End of London on adolescent boys over a long period, and looking at whether or not they developed normally or whether they developed delinquent tendencies. Actually, very interesting about the point here about the hierarchy of knowledge. It's referred to as the Cambridge study, but it took place in the East End of London. So it says something about where the researchers are coming from and the hierarchy of knowledge that's around these kinds of ideas. And that inspired one of the main instigators of this, David Farrington, to come up with the idea of prevention experiments, that we need to get into this idea of having evidence-based, value-for-money prevention experiments that are based on having detailed prospective and longitudinal evaluations that show that certain types of interventions are more effective than others. However, what predominates here is the idea of the locus of change is in the subject. That the subject's behaviour is the focus of change. That the person has to deal with their offending behaviour, and that the locus of change is within the individual. Now, some criminological researchers have said, well, that sounds all very well, but it doesn't really tell us very much about the context, yeah? And it doesn't try to change the context. And it tells us nothing about how context structures the individuals. You can change individuals as much as you want, but, you know, put them back out on the street and, you know, they're living in the same context again, and that structures their behaviour. It takes behaviour out of context, as it were. An argument made by Ray Pawson and Nick Tilley is that, you know, these kind of prevention experiments based on outcome studies, they tend not to transfer very well because they don't localize themselves very well in a new context. And I suppose a position that I think I associate myself with, there's an emerging body of research that says that, well, you know, you can be as Foucauldian as you like and think of crime prevention as being this extension of the panoptic carceral society out into the social body and blah, 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 blah. But let's be realistic here. Yeah, let's be a little bit more realistic here. Crime is a very serious social problem. Crime disrupts communities. Crime splits up families. We do really need to take it on board as a very, very serious issue for policy and for practice. And even with dominant discourses like the risk factor paradigm and the evidence-based paradigm and the value for money frameworks and all these kinds of things that have permeated public policy in the US, the UK, and to some extent here, we do need to be aware of what practitioners do. Yeah? Because what practitioners do sometimes makes a difference. It makes a difference to what actually gets implemented, because practitioners have some agency, they have some power, they have the capacity to decide whether things actually get implemented, and they have some power to shape how they get implemented. So we can't assume, as some Foucauldian criminological theories assume, that people are dopes and that they can't strategize, that they can't practice in ways that makes implementation take on a different form. An example of this would be, I suppose, the ASBO, the Antisocial Behaviour Order. In the UK, statistics on at the ASBO in the UK, in terms of the numbers of ASBOs issued, is skewed towards one particular part of the country. And that's Manchester, mostly the Manchester area, because Manchester City Council were particularly virulent in introducing the ASBO. And one of the reasons it is argued by authors such as Gordon Hughes and others who've written about this is that practitioners have, based on their local traditions, have determined that we're not going to localize these here, we're not going to implement them here. So what practitioners do makes a difference to what actually gets implemented. However, I have to say that I'm not really here, and I hope people aren't disappointed if they're looking for a technical fix. Yeah? I had my technical fix this morning as I left in the form of a cup of coffee. But I'm not here to talk about practice as a technology that can fix ills. Yeah, I'm sorry if that disappoints you. But nonetheless, there are things I think that people can do to make a difference, and the things that practitioners can do is make a difference. When I agreed to come, I kind of clarified with Martin that we said, well, do you want me to do an academic paper? And suggested maybe we'll just talk about your current work and areas of interest that you are. So what I'm going to present now are just a couple of ideas, I think, and I'd be interested to hear what you have to say. My current research interest, as I suggested at the outset, was to look at developing a Bourdieuian approach to governance, largely based on the kind of theoretical frameworks from Pierre Bourdieu. Because crime prevention is really about governance. Yeah? It's about individual regulation. It's about regulations in terms of how the perpetrator should kind of think about, I can't really kind of do this at the time. I have to be rational in how I approach this. And for the victim, well, I have to be able to protect myself against victimhood. So in a sense, it's about how we govern without the state. We have to think about how we're going to rely on using technologies and using like burglar alarms or better locks and all these kinds of things to protect ourselves without the state. So that's what governance is about. Yeah? It's to do with individual regulation, but it's also to do with partnerships and networks. Yeah, and the way in which the state has become decentered and less bureaucratized and arguably more decentered into networks. So needless to say, I have been reading books. I will come back to talk about crime prevention, don't worry. Okay. I want to talk about the Irish case that I'm most familiar with, and some of you will know about as well. What is governance? Governance is about, I suppose, three things, if you take a Bourdieuian approach to governance. It's about integration, inculcation, and domination. Integration in the sense of drawing together a political unity in the state and the citizen. Inculcation in relation to how people are trained, how the subject is formed, the citizen's subjectivity is formed. And ultimately, Bourdieu suggests, of course, that leads to a form of domination. Now, Bourdieu's thinking really relates to things like territory. And his theory of the state is that he suggests that, the state first has to secure the territory and provide security to citizens within the territory. But then it has to permeate the territory with a meaning system, a common meaning system. And going along with political unity through the territory, you have to have this idea of a kind of linguistic unity. People sharing the same system of meanings and understandings with one another. And then the state then has the power to nominate, to select and designate officials to the tasks of governing. What he calls the noblesse d'état, the local notables, the people who will deliver the curriculum at local level. I'm going to get to curriculum, as you suggested, as you introduced earlier. So that notables are people like clerics, artists, teachers, public health officials, all these kinds of people. They're kind of part of the noblesse d'état, and the state retains the power to nominate these people to official positions. In that way, territory can be integrated. Yeah, territory can be integrated, and the state can, as it were, penetrate civil society. Penetrate civil society through this kind of domination, integration, and implication. Okay, that all sounds very interesting and all that. Thank you very much. You've established that you know a little bit about Pierre Bourdieu. That's great. But is there a case for this? Well, let's look at the emergence of youth crime and disorder prevention, as I like to call it, in the Irish context. it didn't come out of nowhere, and nothing ever comes out of nowhere. Something just doesn't arrive from the planet Zanussi as it used to, like a fridge. It gets there because people put it there, and they put it there for a reason. It's put there in a particular historical context. Let's have a think about this historical context. Speaking of which, there are great similarities in terms of how the public housing estates on the periphery of Dublin were built and constructed, and for the same reasons as Niamh documented in her book. So there are very, very strong parallels between some of the regeneration areas here in Limerick and some of the areas I'm going to talk about. And it is about kind of understanding and recognising that it is about, as the subtitle of the book is, it is about social exclusion and change. And so what I want to talk about here, I suppose, reflects those two themes about social exclusion and change. So let me say something about territory and where these youth diversion projects came from, or we could call, give them a more abstract title: youth crime and disorder prevention. Where does it come from? Why did it come here? Where did we get it from? Why did we need it? What were the historic conditions in which it was introduced? Why is that important? And so on. It's not a very good picture, actually. Sorry about that. It's the only one I have, and you can see I've actually squiggled on it to make it come out better in the photocopier, but it's really defaced it here. This is from the Miles Wright report. Miles Wright was a town planner and architect who was commissioned by the Fianna Fáil government in the mid-60s to come up with a proposal for the Greater Dublin area that would be a plan for modernising Dublin. The squiggly bits in here on the top of it are a development zone in which building could not take place because that's where the airport is. They were restricted in terms of how they could deal with the terrible conditions in the inner city at the time: poverty, inequality, poor housing, poor sanitation. And Wright proposed that the only option for developing new housing was to use the land available westwards on the outskirts of Dublin. And the 3 dots, well, there were originally 4 dots proposed. The 3 dots represent Blanchardstown, which is now a huge multicultural centre in this country. Blanchardstown, Clondalkin, and Tallaght. Effectively 3 new towns built on the kind of Milton Keynes model is what was proposed. This was a vision of modern Ireland that came along with the Lamass years. I have a bit faint here. This is like a photocopy of an oldish kind of document that has yellowed. But you can kind of make out the kind of artist's impression. This is from 1967. So it very much had this kind of modern kind of urban landscape is what was being proposed. This is an image of Tallaght. Some high-rise buildings have emerged. The motorway flyover did come around about 1992 or thereabouts, but this all goes back to the Miles Wright report in 1967. And many of Wright's recommendations were implemented. The development of the 3 towns actually went ahead, but contraction in the economy stunted the extent to which the infrastructure could be developed around it. So a lot of the housing went ahead, but much of the kind of amenities and leisure and artistic and cultural facilities didn't follow until some 30 years later. Now, you see a picture here, I suppose, of a fully ordered, kind of integrated society. That's what was envisaged. That was the kind of optimism that was around, I suppose, at the time. And this was going to be our version of Milton Keynes. The new towns that had sprung up in Britain, and indeed in France, was very much the model for what was proposed. Of course, the reality was different. the reality was different. We no longer have the Sunday Tribune. Oh dear. This is a picture taken from Neilstown. Neilstown and Rolandstown are basically the same place, except Rolandstown was built on Neilstown Road, so the two terms are used. A series of events took place over, I suppose, about a 6-month period, culminating with a riot in which policemen were injured, a lot of damage was done. Fire brigade people came to put out the fire when the car was set alight, and the firemen were attacked, and the firemen were sent to hospital. Like in any working class community, there's a kind of outrage at themselves for allowing this happen. They go and they raise money for the firemen, and they have a raffle and have a charity gig and all this kind of stuff. There is some reaction, but the build up to this point sees state officials from the Department of Justice going on regular tours of this particular neighbourhood to fact find as to what's going on. Yeah, and they, even before this happens, they foresee this coming about. Yeah, they foresee this event taking place, and when it does, they're ready to respond. It's just another newspaper cutting from the Time. I've redacted this slightly, okay? A very well-meaning civil servant sent me this memo that was sent to the minister the Monday following those riots, and those two pictures from the newspapers were clipped to the back of this memo. Yeah? And he says that the minister should see these very disturbing reports at the earliest opportunity. There are real grounds for concern that some of the appalling scenes of urban disorder witnessed recently in England, or something close to it, will be repeated in Rolandstown or one of its sister troubled areas, Kilnarden and Moyross in Limerick. But what's most interesting here is the handwritten note. These reports reveal a very serious situation in Rolandstown and are in effect a cry for help from the Gardaí there, similar to one received and acted upon a few years ago from the Gardaí in Tala. That was after the murder had taken place. And I think we should have a meeting suggested by Mr. Dalton, who was then the Secretary of the Department of Justice, as soon as possible. The meeting took place the next day. This was like less than a week. That evening, the evening after the meeting, this was a Monday. The Tuesday, the meeting took place. All these senior guards from around the country came to this meeting in Guard headquarters, including Department of Justice officials. And the minister addressed it all that night. So it was like that. It was very quick acting. They were ready for this. It was something that wasn't something that they pondered over for a long period of time. It was something that was going to happen, and when it did, they were able to act on it. The next day, or the next evening, the minister was in the Dáil setting up what became the Interdepartmental Group on Urban Crime and Disorder. Yeah. So, I think the point I'm trying to make here is there's something about how the state has to integrate territory. Yeah, there was a very, very strong sense of insecurity around this. That we cannot let these areas drift away without some kind of sovereign integration. Yeah? We have to be able to show our citizens that we are in control. So there is something here, I think, about how these territories are governed. At this time, let's not forget, the civic infrastructure is extremely poor. There is no local authority, for instance. The local authorities don't really appear in any shape or don't embed themselves in people's lives until maybe about kind of like 5, 6, 7 years later. The local authorities on the periphery were part of the county, which was a huge area for the population it had. And many of the residents living there, many of the tenants, the local authority tenants, were landlords of the city council. So their landlord was situated 9, 10 miles away in some cases, yeah? And there was very much a kind of crisis of territoriality going on here. Yeah? All our criminologists have referred to this as a crisis of legitimacy, and that the state takes a disciplinary turn when it loses its legitimacy and tries to kind of, through consent, tries to win people back. I'd say what's actually going on here is a crisis of territoriality. The state still keeps some legitimacy, but it strategizes in order to try and retain sovereignty over these spaces. Right? Now, I think where my argument is going with this is that youth crime prevention emerges in Ireland in this context, and it can't be stripped from it. They're not just there. They came from somewhere. They didn't go out and, they didn't go out and try to, re-establish, as they do in France. Every time there's a riot, there's a huge national catharsis about the riot. And they talk about it for weeks, and it's in the public newspapers. And they pour over it, and they set up commissions. And the poor pictures appear in the papers the next day of a grimacing French Jacques Chirac. After the last Banlieue riots that occurred in 2005, they pour over these kinds of things in France. We didn't really do the same pouring, but things emerge in a political context. That's my point, and it has something to do with the way in which the state penetrates territory. How are we doing?
We're going to do half an hour.
We're half an hour in, or half an hour in?
Yeah.
I'm not going to dwell on this too much, but there's enough kind of literature out there to say that, to talk about how that the state realizes around this particular time that it can no longer rule through the old division of institutions into hierarchies. It has to do something. It has to decenter itself in some way, build alliances with civil society and the private sector in order to achieve results. The state's getting too big. We're reaching a crisis of government. We have to do something to make it smaller. Yeah. So it sets itself up into networks. It recruits expertise to help it answer very complex questions because it can't keep all of those officials in the state payroll itself. So it has to recruit alliances. And what I've done here as a piece of empirical research, is to map out the network of actors who were involved in setting up the original youth diversion programs in those territories. Yeah? My interest from this really comes less from the crime prevention side and more from the kind of socio-political kind of analysis side. Yeah? So I'm looking at this really as a case study of governance. And we have I have to give them initials to anonymise them, but AS stands for Assistant Secretary. PO stands for Principal Officer. Very senior people in the state hierarchy, in the policy-making machinery. Assistant Commissioner in regards to economy. The community relations section within the police force. And this is on the state side. Yeah? And on the other side, we have these local actors. In this case, there are other network maps, but in this case, it's a diocesan youth service. Okay. And what we have here is literally the state, through this very well-connected intermediary in the middle here, is involved in a network. Yeah? And what gets exchanged in networks, the arrows mean is this is an exchange of goodwill between them. Yeah? What us sociologists have come to call social capital. Yeah? Yeah? That this person here is acting as a structural bridge between the periphery, i.e. the housing estates we just looked at, yeah, and the state. Yeah? And so this is an example of networked governance. Yeah? But we've moved out of kind of the bureaucratic kind of way of doing things towards a model of networked governance. let's not. Oh, yeah, let's do go back in there. One of the characters in here is a judge. Okay, so you're talking about very, very senior people. Through kind of intermediaries are connected directly with the little people. Yeah. Okay. And that's the kind of shape in which. You know that theory about kind of six stages of what is it? Six degrees of separation. Yeah. Yeah. So there's kind of 2 or 3 degrees of separation here between a very senior judge, very high public profile, can't name him, but he's in there. Okay, as part of this network of actors, something conjoins this group of people together. I never actually got to put my finger on it, but they're there. Okay. So actors connect the state with the urban periphery. That's my point. Through a type of network, governance that integrates territory. And they favour a particular type of practice. They want to see particular things done. They set the agenda for, who does what in relation to policing, community policing, the building of police stations, the securitization of police stations with security barriers and lights and CCTV. This group of people, for a short period of time, are actually governing parts of Ireland. Yeah, and that they see themselves as, and I have this documented in interviews, they see themselves as what they say taking a global role, taking a coordinating role over all other government departments for a period of time. They see themselves as, it was quipped at a conference that I attended with one of the main speakers was the Secretary of the Department of Justice, who said, we set up a mini cabinet. We set up a mini cabinet and I installed myself as Taoiseach. So let me say a couple of things about governance of the subject and practice in the few minutes that I have left. Now, what Bourdieu argues is that the mode of implication, the way in which we create a kind of a common symbolic universe, is, he argues, largely through curriculum and through pedagogic relations, mostly in schools, but not only in schools. We do it through art, we do it through media, we do it through sport. I argue that we're doing it in other ways as well, like through youth crime prevention. Yeah. We haven't got time to read this out, but what my interpretation of what this practitioner is saying. Now, there are alternative practices. I don't want to say that this is the only interpretation of what the role of a youth crime worker is. There are alternatives, but they're subordinated. This is the one that dominates the field. This kind of ideas here of presenting the world in this kind of simple kind of binary logic. Yeah. You've got two choices here. You can go down the road of stealing cars, or the end of that road is prison. The end of that road is prison. Yeah. Or you can be like, in a few years' time, you can be chatting to me saying, well, look, I have all this nice clover, I have all this nice gear, I have a girlfriend, I'm getting married. All the kind of trappings, as it were, of good bourgeois life. Yeah. I've complied. Yeah, I've complied. So you get this kind of deviance conformity going on here. There's a binary logic to all language, according to Bourdieu and the people who influenced him from the French structural linguistics school. You get this kind of binary logic. And Bourdieu calls it a kind of symbolic violence. Yeah? That we put frames on things, as Goffman would say. Yeah? We put frames on things for people. What Bourdieu argues is that we place it into this kind of binary logic. Yeah? Dirty, clean. Yeah? The area is dirty. We have to appear to be clean. There's a scarcity of sanitation. Yeah? It looks like the pre-modern. Yeah? Let's clean it up. Straight, narrow deviance compliance. I know I probably only have about 2 minutes left. I suppose what my research has been trying to do in the last kind of years, I can't remember how many years, and I don't really want to say, too long, is to look at the flows of capital. Look at the flows of social and cultural capital between the young people and the practitioner, the young people and the institutions? Or is it between the institutions and the institutions? Or is it a little bit more complex than that? And basically, I think what I can say in summary is that there's two types. Yeah? The dominant type tends to be non-conversational. It tends to be very much that kind of thing of it's didactic, it's monologic, it's you're going down the wrong road, you're going to be in prison. Yeah? And this dominates the field. This is the ideas that dominate the field. This becomes the model of good practice. This is what we want. We're the people paying for this. We're the guards, we're the Department of Justice, this is what we want. Don't talk about all this, Paulo who? Paulo Freire? What's that about? Yeah? You don't want to be introducing anything critical here. We're critical. Our job is social control. We need to keep the place in order. And people want us and we thank us for doing so. So when you look at the capital flows in these three cases here, in Ballynew, Emmettstown, Fairgreen, two of them are in Dublin, one of them is in a regional city. The capital flow is largely between the state and the institutions. Yeah? In Emmettstown, for instance, it's between the troika of the police, the school principal, and the parish priest. Yeah? The ruling trinity, as it were, or a ruling trinity of them: the superintendent, the sergeant, the principal, and the parish priest. Yeah? And this operates as a kind of flow of capital between people. Yeah? Kind of a gift relationship going on here. Really don't have time to get into that, but when the article comes out, you probably will have time to read it. And then you have the subordinate one, which in a way was probably doing what the Department of Justice might have wanted to get done, which was to work with actual offenders. They wanted to work with we want to get guys who are actually doing stuff, yeah? We don't want to just go out and work with any kid and tell them they need to stay in the straight and narrow. We're already doing that as part of our primary prevention activities anyway. We want to work with the people who really need it. They're not getting a service. These are the most excluded people and the biggest offenders. Nah, we don't want you to do that. We don't want you to do that. We want you to go out and tell everybody how good the guards are. And we want to bring the guards along and get their photographs taken with children. Yeah? Yeah? Getting prizes from guards. Yeah? Getting medals from guards. I went along and played a football match in Finglas with a group of young guys, and I got a medal. Right? But we lost. We actually lost the match. Hang on, the last time I checked, I was a sociologist, so I think it's my job to kind of actually work that one out a little bit. Why would I get a job? Why would I get it? I'm having a Zizek moment here. Why would you give a medal to a loser? Or maybe then to reinforce their position as a loser? You gave them a prize. I have the picture of it in my PhD thesis. A picture of the medal. And hopefully it'll come out in the book. Now this model was developed, it's a much more conversational style. Yeah? Much more conversational style of practice. The flow of capital is between the different actors, but it's also between the young people and the institutions as well. It's very much a conversational model. Yeah? And the police and the Department of Justice find this very, very disconcerting. What's this about? We can't put a name on this. This is not really what we want to have going on here. Yeah? We can't define it. We'll call this special. We'll call this a special case, because it's not really the template that we want to work from. Yeah? But the workers there do lots of good things. They do lots of good things. They go out and they work with kids in the street who are doing fishing, in a local pond. And so the youth worker sets up a lot of networks with these young people. Yeah, networks can do good things. Yeah, isn't all about governance of the soul and all that kind of stuff. There's actually really good stuff going on here, because the guy's got the social capital flowing in the right way between the young people and himself. Yeah. And he engages in these really kind of elaborate conversations about deep moral dilemmas and deep ethical dilemmas, while they're doing the fishing. So you get this conversational style curriculum, this conversational style pedagogy, I should say, going on. So it isn't all doom and gloom. Yeah, there are things that people can do to strategize, to make a difference. And so practice counts. Yeah, practice counts. What people do matters, because the state relies on practitioners and the goodwill of practitioners to implement their commands. The state is dependent, actually, upon practitioners to have their commands implemented. And so what practitioners do to shape how that's implemented really is the issue that we need to focus on going ahead into the future.